There's a new mystery disease in dogs that's going around the United States, causing a lot of deaths in dogs. What is it? Where did it come from? What can you do about it? Let's talk about it a little bit. So I'm Dr. Patrick Jones from the Homegrown Herbalist School of Botanical Medicine. And in addition to being an herbalist and a naturopath for humans, I'm also a veterinarian. I've been a practicing veterinarian for 30 years. And early on in my career, I worked in laboratories. I was a researcher, and I worked also in the Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab at Utah State Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab. And so I have some understanding and some real interest in pathologies and bacteria and viruses and how all that works and how you identify it and what they're doing to the body. And so I thought maybe we ought to talk about this a little bit. So they're calling it a mystery disease. They're calling it a syndrome. And whenever medical people or researchers call something a syndrome, it means they don't know what's going on, unfortunately. And that's the case with this particular pathology. There's a disease going around, a disease process in dogs, and it is in several states in the United States, and I would guess within the next 6 months it'll be in all the states in the United States. That's how these things go. But it starts out with a really strong hacking cough, and there's other diseases that'll do that. There's a disease called kennel cough, caused by a bacterium called Borrelia burgdorferi. And kennel cough's not a big deal. I mean, it's miserable. The dog coughs for 2 weeks, but it's not a life-threatening disease. These dogs are dying. So they're getting that cough. They're coughing really bad. But they're also, unlike kennel cough dogs, they tend to have high fevers, and they tend to have some nasal discharge and some eye discharge. I mean, they look sick and goobery, right? Kennel cough dogs don't. They just cough like crazy. Also, these dogs that have this new disease sometimes have really significant oxygen deprivation. Their lungs are full of fluid and inflammation, and they're not breathing well. And so they get some cyanosis, and cyanosis is the funky doctor word for, the bluing of the tissues. And if dogs weren't hairy, their skin would be a little blue. But you can tell by looking at their lips and their gums and their tongues that they're a little blue because their oxygen levels are too low. Okay. So they often also progress into a really severe pneumonia, and then they die. We're having a lot of fatalities, very high mortality rate with this disease. So what's causing it? Well, they don't really know. They don't really know what's causing it. It's contagious, okay, and so it's caused by something. It's either a virus or a bacterium or something like that. But they don't know for sure. The researchers haven't been able to identify what the pathogen is. In fact, I received an email just this morning from the Kansas State Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab, which is one of the big, great labs. A lot of those state labs are best labs in the world for animal disease stuff. And they were requesting, tissue samples or swabs or mucus samples or lymph nodes or pieces of lung or anything that veterinarians were getting from cases that were suffering from this disease or had died from the disease. Please send us material so we can evaluate and see what the heck's going on. They're trying very enthusiastically to identify the microorganisms that are doing this. So how does this sort of thing happen? I mean, just out of nowhere you have a brand new disease? Well, yeah, that's what happens. Happens all the time. Back in the 1970s, a brand new disease called Parvo came out, canine Parvavirus. Nobody had ever heard of it. Didn't exist, right? And what happens is that these microorganisms, bacteria and viruses, reproduce at an astounding rate. I mean, bacteria have millions of babies in their lifetime, and viruses reproduce very rapidly too. At every time reproduction happens, there's a small chance that the DNA gets tweaked a little or some funny thing happens and you get a mutation, right? You get a really tall kid. You get a kid with red hair. You get a kid that's left-handed instead of right-handed, right? These spontaneous mutations, and most of them don't mean anything and don't do anything. Some of them are real bad for you, right? But sometimes they're very successful and very advantageous. And so what happens is these organisms mutate and become very successful. Like I was saying, in the 1970s, Parvavirus came onto the scene. Nobody had ever seen it or heard of it in dogs. It didn't exist in dogs. It existed in mink and hogs, and cats had a parvovirus called panleukopenia. There were other parvoviruses in the world, but the dogs didn't have one. And all of a sudden, dogs are, dying of this horrific diarrhea and vomiting. And they isolated the virus, and it was a parvovirus, and they did some, genetic sequencing and stuff and figured out, this is probably a mutation of the cat's parvo, the panleukopenia virus. And within months of that virus showing up, it was all over the world and killing millions of dogs. Now, we have a good vaccine for it now, and it doesn't kill millions of dogs if they're vaccinated. If they're not vaccinated, it's a pretty bad disease. So that's what happens. Bacteria do the same thing. They mutate and change, and all of a sudden they're resistant to an antibiotic, or all of a sudden they're causing a more severe disease, or all of a sudden they're a pathogen when they weren't a pathogen before. They were just a nice, friendly guy, and now they're causing disease, And so these things happen in the world. And with disease organisms, it's pretty serious. Another example of this is the canine influenza virus. And that happened about, 2015, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years, 6 years ago? I don't know. I'm not good at time. Anyway, dogs didn't have an influenza virus. Didn't exist in dogs. And all of a sudden we got one. And what happened was the influenza virus mutated, and it switched from being a horse virus to a dog virus. That's what influenzas do. You got swine flu, you got bird flu. They're mutating, coming from one species and jumping into another one. Okay. And so what happened was the first cases were in South Korea and China, and the dogs at the horse track started getting the flu. And they figured out that the virus had mutated, the horse flu had gotten into the dogs. Now it's a dog flu, and then it mutated again. So it'd go from dog to dog. Influenzas have to do 2 mutations. And then all the dogs were getting it. And what happened was they had a big dog show in Chicago, and somebody from one of those countries, probably South Korea, brought their doggie to the big dog show in Chicago. And then all the doggies at the big dog show went to all the other big dog shows and to their hometowns and to the boarding facilities and to the vets and the dog parks. And we had canine influenza in every state in this country like that fast. I mean, it was months. And so, again, came out of nowhere. Now, this new situation is a little different. Usually, a new bug comes out, scientist takes a little bit of poop or goobers or guts or something and says, puts it under a microscope. Yeah, it's this bug, it's this virus, it's this bacteria. He cultures it, yeah, that's what it is, that's causing it. Gives it to another animal, they get the disease. That's Cook's postulate, right? If you remember from biology or medical school or things. There was a guy named Cook back in the old days that said, if you give something to an animal and he gets the same disease the other guy has, it means that's what's causing the disease, right? 1 + 1 is 2. Anyway, usually scientists are very quick to identify the new pathogen, whether it's a virus or a bacterium or a fungus or whatever. And, I used to, when I worked in the animal disease lab, I used to isolate diseases all the time. They would bring us animals that had died for autopsies, necropsies, and we would take tissues and culture it out. And I'd say, that's Pasteurella hemolytica. That's what killed that guy. That's Pseudomonas. That's what killed that guy. That's this virus. That's that virus. We could identify those things very easily. And even if it was a new one, even if it was a new parvo or a new strain of strep or a new strain of whatever, scientists can figure out, it's close enough that their tests work and they can say, oh yeah, this is a strep, but it's a little different than the other guy. This is a Pasteurella. It's a little different. This is a influenza virus, a little different. We'll give it a new name, but they can find things. They're not finding things on this one. So why is that? Well, there's a couple of possibilities. One is that they don't have a good test. Maybe it's a really novel virus and it's not, showing, they can't find it using their normal tests. Maybe it's, there's other things besides bacteria. There's spirochetes and there's mycoplasma. Some of those are a little fussier to grow and culture. And, maybe they haven't figured out the right environment to make the little guy reproduce in a laboratory so they can say, oh yeah, that's what it is. Could also be that it's an organism that doesn't last very long. Maybe the thing is a very short-lived organism and it's dead and gone before the animal's even, really sick. Maybe it's doing its damage, then the animal dies, but by the time the animal's dead from it, there's nothing left of what will actually cause the problem, right? Could also be that it's a combination of things. That's what I think it probably is that it's a combination of factors. It could be a virus and a bacterium that are interacting. Could be two bacteria. Could be two viruses. I don't know. Sometimes microorganisms facilitate the work of each other, not on purpose. It's not like they have meetings and plan these things. But what's an example? Well, like AIDS, right? People don't die of AIDS. They die of some infection they got or some cancer they got. The AIDS virus kept their immune system from fighting. Does that make sense? And so you could say that this guy died of, pneumonia or a weird cancer he never should have had. But really, the reason he got that thing was because the AIDS virus beat up his immune system, right? Caused immunodeficiency. And so it could be a cascade of different elements. And it may be that's why they're having a hard time identifying it. Bacteria do the same thing. You can get bronchitis and your lungs are aggravated and your immune system's kind of wore out from fighting the bronchitis. And then another bug comes in and gives you pneumonia and you die of the pneumonia, right? Well, the bronchitis didn't kill you, but it sure beats you up so the pneumonia could. Does that make sense? And it could be something like that, some cascade of events that aren't single things. And so it's harder for the scientists to identify. I'll give you another example just of how science is, the limitations of science. There's a chemical in barberry, the plant barberry, that's called berberine, and berberine is a good antibiotic. But it's only a good antibiotic if it's in the presence of another flavonoid that's in barberry, and the two of them, when they're together, makes berberine a really great antibiotic. Berberine all by itself isn't, okay? And so by the same token, you can have, viruses or bacteria that are creating conditions that make it nice for the other virus or the other bacteria to do their thing. So it could be a multifactorial situation. So what are you going to do about it? Well, prevention is always great. Not getting the disease in the first place is a really good idea. And it is transmissible. So we know it's a disease process. We know it's a microorganism because you can catch it from another dog. Well, you can't, but your dog can, right? It's contagious. Radiation and toxins and things like that aren't contagious from one animal to another. You got to be exposed to the problem yourself, okay? And so we know this is caused by some kind of a microorganism just because of the behavior of the disease. And so, prevention is great. Well, how do you prevent it? Well, you keep your dog away from other dogs. That's how you prevent it. Dog parks, groomers, boarding facilities, even vet clinics. Those are all places where dogs might meet lots of other dogs, right? And so if you're accustomed to taking your dog down to the dog park and having him chase around with all the other dogs and play, his exposure risk is much higher than if he's sitting in your lap watching TV, okay? It's also a good idea to keep your dog vaccinated. There's vaccines for canine influenza. There's vaccines for kennel cough. There's vaccines for para-influenza. And, those diseases aren't causing this problem. But again, they might debilitate the dog to the point where, he can be more susceptible to this other thing or more susceptible to a serious outcome from this other thing. All right. And a lot of people have strong opinions about vaccine, and I understand that. I really do. Sometimes with humans, the likelihood of you catching the disease is very remote, and the likelihood of you having any serious consequence because you caught the disease is very remote. And sometimes the side effects of the vaccine or the risk of the vaccine is greater than those other things. And so you say, well, geez, why am I getting that vaccine, right? But dogs live in a different world. That works for humans. It works for a human to say, maybe I don't need that vaccine. But humans don't go around licking the noses of every other human they meet, right? And sniffing their caboose. Humans don't do that. So we can minimize our risk way better than your dog can, because dogs are dumb. They explore the whole world with their mouth, and they all live in third world countries where their neighbors poop on the lawn, okay? And so dogs' exposure to disease is vastly higher. Their likelihood of encountering a disease is way higher than your kid's likelihood of encountering measles in a room full of kids vaccinated for measles. Does that make sense? So vaccinating dogs is a completely different paradigm than vaccinating humans, and you have to make those decisions yourself. But I'm telling you, get your dog vaccinated. He's at much higher risk. Okay. Well, what about herbs? I'm an herbalist, right? Well, can herbs help? Well, absolutely. Herbs are very, very good at solving viral and bacterial problems. When the coronavirus outbreak came, I thought, oh, shoot, I better look at my herb formulas and see, if we need to do something about the coronavirus. And I got thinking about it for a minute. I thought, well, elder kills coronaviruses. Mullein kills coronaviruses. There's a lot of herbs that kill coronaviruses. There's a lot of herbs. They've been doing it forever. And they don't know this is a fancy, exciting coronavirus. We just won't tell them. It'll be fine. And that's how it turned out. The same herbs that I was using for head colds and for pneumonias and viral infections of influenza and coronavirus and other scenarios work just fine on the new one. Okay. And I'm sure it'll be the same way with this bug. And so what would I do? Well, what can you do? You can stimulate immunity, right? And that's a good general approach. There's a lot of herbs that stimulate immune responses. There's astragalus, there's echinacea. There's a lot of herbs, olive leaf. There's a lot of plants, and we could go on and on about that. In fact, in the Homegrown Herbalist School, we go on and on about that. We have like 4 lessons on the immune system. I wrote a blog article. If you want some specifics on what herbs and what formulas and what are some good things to do, look up in the description or down in the description, wherever it is. Where'd we put that? Anyway, the video description of this video has a link to a blog article. You can go read about that and get into more specifics of what I do. But I would do some immunity support, and then I would also attack the bug itself. I would use some antibiotic herbs, right? And antibiotic herbs are against bacteria, okay? So herbs like calendula, herbs like echinacea, herbs like, barberry, yarrow. There's a lot of herbs that have good antibacterial effects. I'd be using those because I don't know what it is, right? And then I would also approach it from the other angle, and I would use some antiviral herbs. I would use some elder. I would use some yarrow again, some mullein. There's a lot of herbs that have good antiviral properties. And so if we do that, if we're supporting the immune system, if we're beating up the bacteria and beating up the viruses, chances are pretty good that we're going to be able to cover whatever this organism is. I don't know for sure. I haven't tried any of this. All right. But if my dog started coughing and had a fever and looked like it had this organism, this syndrome, that's what I would do. And my guess is because the veterinarians aren't finding anything that kills this stuff. All right. So my guess is that there's a strong viral component. I don't know if that's the only component, but I'm guessing there's a strong viral component. And so, because otherwise they'd have better luck with the antibiotics. Now, I did see on one of the news stations the other day, they had a thing that some lady's dog was saved with chloramphenicol, which is an antibiotic. And so they're all excited that, chloramphenicol is going to fix it. Well, the dog had severe pneumonia, right? And so was that pneumonia being caused by the organism that caused the original problem, or was it a secondary bacterial pneumonia? We don't know. It was one dog, right? And so, things tend to get blown up and, this is the thing to use for that because it worked on this guy. And we need to do more research. And certainly chloramphenicol is one to research. But my guess is that because all the other vets in the country are trying everything else that isn't working, my guess is it has a strong viral component. And we just don't have good antiviral medicines. We do have some good antiviral herbs. Okay. So that's what I would do. I would minimize exposure by, minimizing trips to the groomer, minimizing trips to the, boarding the dogs, minimizing trips to the dog park. Just don't expose your dog to 100 other dogs, and he's not going to catch it in your living room. All right. He has to catch it from another dog. It's a contagious disease. All right. And so minimizing exposure, number one. And if it came along to my house today with what I know, which is almost nothing, I would do immune stimulation. I would do antiviral herbs. I would do antibiotic herbs. That's what I would do. Like I said, go down to the link in the description. I've got some specifics on some things that I would use that we won't take the time to go into here. But I'm Dr. Patrick Jones. If you'd like to learn more about veterinary herbalism or human herbalism, because we cover both in the Homegrown Herbalist School of Botanical Medicine, swing by homegrownherbalist.net and and have a look. The school is very comprehensive, very deep. You have lifetime access. There's no time constraints of any kind. There's a great forum where all the students get together and we talk about things and cases and plants, and it's a great situation, great community. I'm Dr. Patrick Jones. If you enjoyed this, put a little like there on the like button. And if you'd like to get more information, as I learn more about this, I'll update the information we've got here. As soon as we figure out what the heck this is, I'll let you know, and we may have some more specific things that we can do. But go ahead and hit that subscribe button and you'll be in the loop for that kind of information. And put some comments in. We look at them and I try to reply to those. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. I'm Dr. Patrick Jones from the Homegrown Herbalist School of Botanical Medicine, and have a great day.